We installed cameras in every corner to protect our children from the dangers we imagined, without noticing that we were blind to the miracles already unfolding in front of our eyes while we hunted for ghosts that never existed. The monitoring room breathed the stale air of artificial vigilance, 32 blue screens reflecting the face of a man whose eyes had forgotten how to see beauty. Leo Mendez watched the daycare's empty night through lenses that cost more than all his memories as a photographer. His watchful shift was a sentence he served in exchange for a salary that bought safety for the family growing inside his wife. The man who once chased golden dawn light in ancient forests now hunted shadows in corridors painted in colors that promised cognitive development but delivered only monitored loneliness. It was in the deep silence of the small hours that absence became presence. On the screen that showed the kitchen, an elderly figure moved with the grace of someone dancing with ghosts. Anna Kowalski, the cleaner everyone saw but no one truly noticed, performed a nightly ritual that turned cleaning into poetry. Her choreographed movements arranged the wooden toys not according to bureaucratic logic but by a secret geometry known only to her immigrant soul. Plush bears and wooden cars became miniature constellations, silent galaxies that only made sense from above, through the impersonal lens that was meant to watch for danger but had stumbled upon miracles. Leo watched, mesmerized, as the woman wrote something tiny on the label of a toy, her eyes meeting the camera not with fear, but with the calm of someone who knows some secrets are too big to stay hidden. That moment revealed a disturbing truth. He was not witnessing a violation of protocol, but the most dangerous kind of subversion, beauty offered freely, with no expectation of recognition or reward. His attention drifted to another screen, where Marcus Jenkins turned food preparation into a nocturnal alchemy. The former chef who had traded Michelin stars for the quiet of feeding children drew smiles with honey, created forests from slices of apple, turned oatmeal into clouds that promised lighter days. Every gesture was a silent prayer, a loving rebellion against the tyranny of efficiency. As he watched these nightly rituals, Leo felt something he had not felt since his last photography exhibit. That sharp ache in the chest when art goes beyond technique and becomes pure truth. He was not seeing employees serving their hours. He was seeing anonymous artists creating ephemeral masterpieces for an audience that did not even know it was standing inside a gallery. The irony was cruel. The cameras installed to capture threats were documenting the safest and most human moments in the entire place. On another screen, the director, Sarah Chen, appeared in her office, her body bent under the weight of charts and metrics that never measured what truly mattered. Even at a distance, Leo could see the tension in her shoulders, the internal struggle between the bureaucrat who signed reports and the woman who stroked forgotten toys with a tenderness that contradicted every protocol she had created. That was when Leo understood the real secret the cameras were hiding. It was not about negligence or imminent danger. It was about the stubborn humanity that survived in spite of all the systems built to suffocate it. It was about small acts of loving rebellion that happened in dead hours, when no one was performing for evaluations or chasing approval. And when Anna, on the kitchen screen, looked straight at the camera and gave a smile that seemed to say, "I know you are watching," Leo understood that his life would never be the same. Because some secrets, once discovered, cannot be ignored. And the greatest of all was this: they had been so busy watching for what might go wrong that they had gone blind to what was already going right, gloriously right, in the small everyday miracles that held up the world while everyone slept. What began as bureaucratic work became a secret mission when Leo discovered that his screens showed not violations, but silent versions of the very humanity he had thought lost, and that by witnessing these invisible miracles, he was unknowingly healing the parts of himself that constant surveillance had turned to stone. The nights turned into sacred ceremonies. What had once been a watch shift became a vigil in the oldest sense of the word, a reverent waiting for the divine to appear in the ordinary. Leo arrived earlier, prepared his coffee with the care of a priest preparing wine, and took his place not as a guard of an empty space, but as a witness to a continuous miracle that unfolded in spite of bureaucracy, in spite of protocols, in spite of everything that tried to kill the magic of genuine care. He began to write in an old notebook, the same one he had used for sketching photographs in the forest. He recorded the small rituals the cameras captured. They were not security reports, but prose poems about the cleaner who turned cleaning into choreography, about the cook who elevated feeding to a sacred art, about the director whose humanity seeped through the cracks of her professional armor. Leo realized he was documenting not what was wrong, but what was deeply, radically right. Anna Kowalski became his nocturnal muse. He watched her create constellations out of toys, each arrangement a silent story told through inanimate objects that came to life in her hands. One night, using maximum zoom, Leo managed to read what she wrote on the toy labels. They were poems in Polish, short verses about stars that never go out and love that does not know borders. He did not understand the words, but he understood their music, the melody of hope that went beyond language. Marcus Jenkins revealed himself as an alchemist of the everyday. Leo documented how the former chef created not only meals, but sensory experiences that prepared the children not only for the day, but for life. The honey smiles were not just decoration. They were promises of sweetness in a bitter world. The forests made of vegetables were not just creative arrangement. They were invitations to imagination. Leo realized that Marcus was feeding not only bodies, but souls. And Sarah Chen, the director trapped in her own efficiency, became the most tragic and hopeful character of all. Leo saw her fighting herself, her fingers typing reports while her heart begged to play, her eyes scanning metrics while her soul longed for a real connection. One night, he caught her dancing alone in the music room, her awkward movements a silent prayer for freedom. The most extraordinary thing was how this poetic observation began to heal Leo himself. His nights of vigil turned into unauthorized therapy sessions. While he watched Anna create beauty from chaos, he began to organize his own scattered memories. As he watched Marcus transform simple ingredients into magic, he began to see his own life not as a series of failures, but as raw material for something beautiful. While he watched Sarah fighting for authenticity, he recognized his own battle between the artist he had been and the security guard he had become. He began to arrive home different. His wife noticed. His eyes were no longer empty, but full of a light she had not seen since the days when he photographed sunrises. He embraced her pregnant belly not with the anxiety of someone who fears the future, but with the reverence of someone who witnesses daily miracles and knows that the greatest one of all is growing inside her. The cameras, once instruments of surveillance, had become his windows into a parallel world where beauty still reigned. He was no longer watching. He was learning. Learning from Anna that true art does not need galleries, only witnesses willing to see. Learning from Marcus that the deepest care often hides inside ordinary tasks. Learning from Sarah that even those most trapped by the system carry inside themselves the seeds of revolution. On a particularly clear night, as he watched Anna write her Polish poems, Leo picked up his notebook and began to write not about others, but about himself. about the photographer who had learned to see through lenses but had forgotten how to see with his heart, about the man who had traded the freedom of forests for the safety of four walls, only to discover that the real forest was inside those walls, in the silent gestures of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He looked at the 32 screens and saw not a security system, but a mosaic of resilient humanity. Each screen told a different story, but all of them sang the same song. The song of beauty that persists, of care that refuses to be domesticated, of love that finds a way to bloom even in the driest soil. In that moment, Leo understood that his secret mission was not only to witness these miracles, but to protect them. Because in a world that values only what can be measured and monetized, invisible beauty is the most vulnerable thing of all. And he, the guard-turned-poet, had become its unofficial guardian, the archivist of common miracles that held up the world while everyone slept. The cameras did not reveal dangerous secrets, but ordinary miracles unfolding in the gaps between protocols, small revolutions of love that turned mundane tasks into sacred ceremonies, proving that true magic does not live in the extraordinary, but in the radical beauty of what we do when we believe no one is watching. Leo turned his nights into anthropological expeditions into the kingdom of invisible care. Each shift was a deeper immersion into the parallel universe that existed in the shadows of bureaucracy, a world where cleaners were poets, cooks were alchemists, and directors were secret dancers. He documented not what was broken, but what was so right that it hurt. The stubborn beauty that insisted on blooming despite every system designed to prune it. Anna Kowalski revealed herself as an archivist of untold memories. Leo discovered that she did not only create constellations with toys, but that each arrangement told a specific story based on the children who would play with them. For Liam, the boy who feared the dark, she created protective constellations with nocturnal animals that guarded his dreams. For Chloe, the girl who cried when her mother left, she built maps of return with toy cars that always found their way back home. Her Polish poems on the labels were blessings in code, silent prayers for children who would never know that someone prayed for them in a language they did not understand. Marcus Jenkins raised children's food to the level of sacred art. Leo recorded how the former chef not only prepared meals, but created sensory experiences that taught lessons no curriculum could contain. His vegetable forests were not just creative arrangement. They were miniature ecology classes, where carrots became trees and broccoli turned into magic bushes. His honey smiles were not simply decorative. They were promises that life could be sweet even when it was bitter. Leo watched how Marcus hummed as he worked, his tunes not in English, but in an invented language that sounded like streams and birds, the universal tongue any child would understand. Saracen, the director imprisoned by numbers and charts, proved to be the most complex character of all. Leo caught her in pure human contradiction, typing efficiency reports with one hand while the other caressed a drawing a child had left on her desk. He saw her correct financial spreadsheets with a stern expression, only to burst into genuine laughter when she found a toy hidden in her drawer. The greatest revelation came when he watched her late at night, rehearsing what seemed to be a speech for the parents. But it was not the corporate speech she would give the next day. It was a raw confession about what really mattered in childhood development, words that would never leave her mouth in public. The miracles did not stop with the adults. The children themselves, in their moments of supervised freedom, revealed wisdom that protocols could never capture. Leo documented how they created their own rituals of care. How Liam always put Chloe's favorite toy back in exactly the place where she would find it. How Noah shared his snack with children who had forgotten theirs. How tiny gestures of empathy appeared spontaneously, without anyone teaching them. The physical space of the daycare also revealed its secrets to the patient observer. Leo noticed how the morning light entered through the eastern window and illuminated exactly the corner where Anna left her constellations, as if the sun itself were blessing her art. He realized how the wind sneaking through the cracks made the wooden furniture sing softly, creating a natural symphony that accompanied the nightly rituals. Even Portland's rain seemed part of the show, beating against the windows like percussion for the silent dance unfolding inside. Each night brought a new layer of discovery. Leo began to see patterns where before he had seen only coincidence. Moments when Anna and Marcus, without speaking, created matching themes in their respective domains, as if they were tuned to a frequency that only they and the cameras could hear. He witnessed the night when Sarah, in a rare moment of distraction, began arranging toys in the same celestial pattern as Anna, her business school-trained fingers rediscovering the muscle memory of a childhood long buried under responsibility. The greatest miracle of all, however, was how this observed beauty began to create its own ecosystem of care. Leo documented how the children, without being taught, started to respond to the invisible magic around them, drawing stars after finding Anna's constellations, creating their own stories with food after eating in Marcus's forests, showing a deeper empathy that seemed to sprout from the fertile soil of genuine care they breathed without knowing it. In all these observations, Leo reached the deepest truth. These were not miracles in a supernatural sense, but in a human one. They were proof that beauty and care are as essential to our nature as breathing. That even in the most controlled and bureaucratic environment, love finds a way to sprout, to create, to transform the ordinary into the sacred. That true safety does not live in surveillance, but in the quiet certainty that somewhere, someone is creating beauty for you, even if you never know. But our discovery woke the system, because in a world that values only what can be measured and monetized, invisible beauty is seen not only as irrelevant, but as dangerously subversive, a threat to the established order that must be controlled before it infects others with its dangerous humanity. The first crack in Leo's observed paradise arrived in the form of a surprise audit. Two men in flawless suits and faces that had never learned to smile walked through the daycare with tablets and checklists. Their eyes scanned not children, but numbers. Their ears were deaf to the silent music in the air. They were inspectors from a new certification program called Measurable Excellence, and their mission was to eliminate every variable that could not be quantified, controlled, and replicated in spreadsheets. Leo watched them through his cameras, his heart tightening when one of the men stopped in front of the shelf where Anna had created her latest constellation. Irregular arrangement of toys, the inspector noted, tapping his tablet. Potential risk of falling. Standardize immediately. The beauty Leo had watched for weeks was reduced to a safety violation. Anna's poetry became a problem to be solved. The inspectors reached the kitchen while Marcus prepared his magical lunches. Waste of time on unnecessary presentation, they recorded when they saw his vegetable forests. Optimized process for maximum efficiency. They measured the time Marcus spent on each plate, timed his movements, reduced his art to numbers that failed to capture even a fraction of its essence. The hardest blow came when they examined Sarah's reports. Excessive time spent in unstructured interactions with children, they wrote, referring to the moments when she forgot she was a director and simply became human. Implement standardized engagement protocols. The spontaneous tenderness Leo admired so much was classified as managerial inefficiency. Sarah called an emergency meeting. Leo watched through the cameras as she presented the audit results, her face a mosaic of internal conflict. On one side, the director who understood the language of business and knew that without certification the daycare would lose funding. On the other, the woman who had witnessed every day the very magic these inspectors wanted to erase. "We need to standardize our processes," she said in a voice that tried to sound firm but shook halfway through. "The creative toy arrangements must follow a pre-approved layout. Food presentation must focus on nutritional efficiency, not on creativity." The word creativity left her mouth like a poison she was forced to swallow. Leo saw Anna in the audience, her shoulders folding like flowers under frost. He saw Marcus close his eyes, as if praying for patience. He watched the other educators exchange tired glances. They knew deep down that true education happened in the spaces between protocols, not inside them. In the days that followed, Leo watched the slow death of the beauty he loved. Anna's constellations were replaced by symmetrical rows of toys organized by size and color. Marcus's forests became standardized portions served on plastic trays. Sarah's secret dance was buried under piles of paperwork in efficiency meetings. The real tragedy, however, was not in the visual change. It was in the silence that followed. The children stopped spinning their spontaneous stories. The staff lost the light in their eyes. Even the daylight seemed to enter differently through the windows, as if it knew it was no longer welcome. Leo recorded everything in his notebook, his notes growing more desperate each night. He saw the magic dying and felt powerless to save it. His nights of vigil turned from celebration into mourning, each screen showing not miracles, but ghosts of what had been. The final threat appeared when Sarah, under pressure from quarterly results, implemented a new employee monitoring system. Now not only the children were watched, the adults were too. Every gesture, every moment of spontaneous creativity, every unprotocoled act of care would be recorded and evaluated. On the first night under the new system, Leo watched Anna try to build one of her constellations, only to step back when a red light flashed, a warning that she was deviating from the approved protocol. He saw Marcus look at the ingredients with nostalgia, his hands held back by the new rules. He watched Sarah lock herself in her office, her body bent not under the weight of responsibility, but under the burden of betraying herself. In that moment, Leo realized that the true enemy was not the inspectors or the certifications. It was the ideology behind them. The belief that anything that cannot be measured does not deserve to exist. It was a war against the invisible, a crusade against the intangible, a silent extermination of beauty that refuses to be captured by spreadsheets or reports. He looked at his 32 screens and saw not a security system, but a battlefield. On one side, bureaucracy with its weapons of measurement and control. On the other, stubborn beauty insisting on sprouting through cracks in the concrete. And in the middle, himself, the guard-turned-witness, who now had to decide whether he would continue merely watching or join the silent resistance. My choice cost me everything: the job that supported my growing family, the respect of colleagues who once saw me as a competent professional, and almost my sanity when I realized I was being punished not for negligence, but for the unforgivable crime of seeing beauty where the system ordered me to see only numbers and protocols. The dismissal meeting took place on an autumn morning so gray it seemed custom-made for the occasion. Sarah sat behind her massive cherrywood desk, her hands clasped as if praying for courage she did not have. Beside her was the human resources representative, a man with eyes that never seemed to blink, in a folder containing the end of Leo's career. "Leo," Sarah began, her voice the hoarse whisper of someone who had not slept, "we found your notebook." The words fell into the room like stones on a frozen lake. Leo felt the floor vanish beneath his feet, the world blurring around the edges. His notebook. The one that contained not security reports, but poems about toy constellations in vegetable forests, observations about Anna's nightly choreography and Marcus's culinary alchemy. "We violated your privacy." "I know," Sarah continued, avoiding his gaze, "but given the content, your notes about the staff, the intimate details you recorded, we have no choice." The human resources representative took over, his voice as impersonal as metal grinding against metal. "Your behavior represents a serious violation of multiple policies. Excessive surveillance of coworkers, creation of personal files on staff members, diverting your attention from your primary responsibilities." Each accusation twisted like a knife. Leo tried to explain, words pouring out in a desperate stream about invisible beauty, everyday miracles, what truly mattered beyond reports and metrics. But his explanations sounded like the ramblings of a man who had lost touch with reality. Sarah listened with an expression that slid from pity to fear. "Leo, this is a company, not—" "I do not even know what you think it is," she said. "We have legal responsibilities, insurers, parents to satisfy. Your fixation on the staff is creating an unsafe work environment." The word fixation hurt more than all the others. He was not fixated. He was in awe. There was a cosmic difference between those two things, but in the language of bureaucracy, both collapsed into the same threat. The termination document slid across the desk. Leo stared at it without reading, his mind instead filling with the image of his wife's pregnant belly, the rent due in 15 days, the prenatal medical bills that depended on this salary. He thought of the camera he wanted to buy to photograph his child, of the diapers that cost more than some of his own dinners, of the security he had promised his family and that now vanished like smoke. On the bus home, the world outside looked as if all its colors had been drained away. Leo counted the money in his wallet. $87 until the next paycheck that would never arrive. $87 between him and complete ruin. He looked through the fogged glass and saw people going to work, living their normal lives in a world where watching beauty was considered a real job, not a firing offense. When he came home, his wife was in the kitchen, her dress stretched around her belly in curves that spoke of life and future. "How was your day, love?" she asked, her smile still innocent of the storm approaching. Leo could not say the words. He simply knelt in front of her, pressed his face against her belly, and cried. Not the contained tears of sadness, but the deep, raw sobs of a man who had lost not just a job, but his way of seeing the world. His wife stroked his hair, her hands doing all they could, and in that moment he knew he had failed her in a way he would never fully repair. The days that followed were a waking nightmare of phone calls to employment agencies, visits to welfare offices, online applications for jobs that never answered. Each refusal was a reminder that his age, his strange experience, his unique way of seeing the world, everything he was, had no value in a market that wanted young, pliable employees willing to see only what was printed in the manuals. The humiliation reached its peak when he ran into Marcus at the supermarket. The former chef avoided him, slipping quickly into another aisle as if Leo carried a contagious disease. The silence spoke louder than any accusation. He was now a pariah, a man who had seen too much beauty and paid the price. On the darkest night, sitting in his kitchen with bills scattered across the table like evidence of his failure, Leo looked at his hands. Hands that had once held cameras that captured glorious dawns, hands that now trembled not from emotion but from pure fear. He picked up an old photograph of his younger self, smiling with the innocence of someone who believes that seeing beauty is a virtue, not a vice, and wondered if he had made the greatest mistake of his life. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe the world truly had no place for someone who saw constellations on toy shelves. Maybe he should have followed the rules, kept his head down, watched only what he was ordered to watch. Maybe beauty, in the end, was a luxury a man like him could not afford. He looked out the window at the stars he had once loved to photograph, the same stars Anna wrote about for the children, and felt an irony so sharp it almost choked him. He had spent weeks documenting how beauty persisted despite everything, only to find that this very persistence was what the system most feared and most efficiently punished. In that moment, at the bottom of his private pit, Leo understood that some falls have no floor. They simply keep going, taking jobs, security, and finally the very capacity to see the world with eyes that still believe in miracles. But in the deepest isolation my soul had ever known, I discovered I was not alone in my fall. Others also saw the miracles I had documented. Others also missed the beauty the system had erased, and together, without planning or conspiracy, we began to weave a silent network of resistance that would prove that true safety does not live in surveillance, but in the community that forms when ordinary people decide to protect the extraordinary that lives inside the ordinary. The first message arrived on a rainy Thursday, when Leo had already accepted that silence would be his new permanent reality. It came from a mother he would never have expected to hear. Eleanor Vance, a renowned neuroscientist and one of the Daycare's harshest critics during parent meetings. The message was short, but her words carried the weight of true change. Leo, I need to talk to you. My daughter is no longer the same since the constellations disappeared. I was wrong about what really matters. Leo read the message again and again, his trembling hands holding the phone like a lifeline in a sea of despair. He did not answer right away. Fear was still a close companion. But then more messages began to arrive, like seeds sprouting in soil he believed was dead. Jennifer, little Noah's mother. Noah has been drawing empty stars since the toys were standardized. He says the constellations ran away. Can we talk? Amanda, Chloe's mother, the one who used to complain about everything. Marcus's vegetable forests were the only reason my daughter ate broccoli. Now she refuses everything. We are losing something precious. One by one, the mothers began to show up, not online, but at his door, in that modest house, bringing not only words of support, but concrete evidence of the impact that erased beauty had had on their families. They told stories of children who had regressed emotionally since the magic vanished, of sleepless nights, of returning nightmares, of a light that had gone out at the daycare and that no expensive toy or excellence certificate could turn back on. The most powerful revelation came when Eleanor arrived with her laptop and showed Leo not only observations, but actual brain data. She had quietly monitored her daughter's brain waves during the magic periods and after they ended. The patterns show an increase of about 40% in default network activity during the creative periods, she explained, her scientist eyes shining with a discovery that went beyond pure science. Anna's constellations and Marcus's forests activated the same neural circuits as deep meditation and aesthetic experience. The most unexpected allies, however, came from the daycare staff themselves. Marcus Jenkins showed up at Leo's door one night carrying a small basket of bred animals he still baked secretly at home, shaped like the creatures he could no longer create in the daycare. They killed the magic. "Leo," he said, his hands still shaking with contained rage. "And they thought nobody would notice." Anna came the next day, her old eyes heavy with a sadness that spoke of decades of unrecognized beauty. She brought her notebook of Polish poems, not the shortened versions she wrote on labels, but the originals full of metaphors about stars that keep shining even when clouds hide them. "They think rules can kill beauty," she whispered in hesitant English. "But beauty is like a seed in winter. It looks dead, but it is only sleeping." What began as a small group of concerned people turned into a living movement. Eleanor created a petition grounded in scientific data, showing that unstructured creative elements were not a luxury, but a neurobiological necessity. The other mothers began to document behavioral changes in their children, building a file of evidence no audit report could easily dismiss. The turning point came when Sarah appeared at Leo's door, not as a director, but as a woman. She came after hours, her face marked by sleepless nights and days of inner conflict. "They promised me it would be better," she said, the words leaving her in an exhausted sigh. "They said standardization would bring excellence. All it brought was emptiness." She told Leo about the investors' pressure, about the threats of losing funding, about the constant fear of failure that kept her from seeing what truly mattered. "I saw what Anna and Marcus were doing," she confessed, tears finally breaking through her professional armor. "I felt the difference they made. But I was afraid to admit that some things cannot be measured in spreadsheets." In that moment, in Leo's small living room, surrounded by mothers, staff, and a repentant director, something was born. Not a protest, but a collective revelation. They were not fighting against the daycare. They were fighting for it. They did not want to destroy the system. They wanted to remind it of the humanity it had forgotten. When Eleanor's little daughter, who had come along, picked up one of Marcus's bred animals and began to make up her own story with it, Leo understood that true resistance did not live in demonstrations or petitions. It lived in small acts of beauty that insisted on blooming. In the stories children kept creating in spite of everything. In the invisible web of care that persisted even when the system tried to rip it apart. He looked at the mixed group gathered in his living room, a neuroscientist, a poet cleaner, an alchemist chef, a director in crisis, worried mothers, and saw not a conspiracy, but a constellation. Each was a star shining with its own light, and together they formed a pattern of resistance stronger than any protocol or certificate. For the first time since his dismissal, Leo no longer felt like a victim, but like a point of connection in a network far larger than anything he had imagined. His fall had not been the end. It had been the beginning of something no camera could fully capture, but that any heart willing to see could witness. The final confrontation revealed not only that the miracles existed, but that the real secret was our collective blindness to the beauty that had always been there, and that when we finally learn to see differently, we discover that the most important cameras are not on the walls, but in how we choose to look at the ordinary world around us, turning surveillance into witness and care into sacred ceremony. The meeting that redefined the future of Little Explorers did not take place in the conference room, but in the daycare garden, under the open sky Anna loved so much in her poems. On one side was not bureaucracy with its folders and tablets, but life in its purest form. Children playing, mothers watching, staff working. On the other side there were no enemies, only people who had forgotten how to see and were ready to learn again. Sarah began not with charts or reports, but with an apology that came from the most vulnerable part of her soul. "We installed cameras to look for threats," she said, her voice heavy with an emotion no corporate training could manufacture. "And in the process we went blind to real safety, the safety that comes from genuine care, from spontaneous beauty, from a humanity that does not fit inside spreadsheets." She did not offer Leo his old job back. She offered something larger. Together, they would create a new program called Corners of Beauty, special spaces in every room where unstructured creativity would not only be allowed, but celebrated. Anna would be officially named Artist in Residence. Marcus would become Creative Culinary Master. And Leo, the greatest miracle of all, would be Chief Observer, training other staff members not in surveillance, but in how to see the beauty that already existed. The transformation did not stop with new titles and programs. It unfolded in the small gestures that began to bloom again. Anna returned to her constellations, but now with the children helping, learning that toys could tell stories and shelves could become galaxies. Marcus rebuilt his vegetable forests, but now invited the children into the process, turning meals into culinary adventures. Sarah started to dance with the children during music time, her awkward moves now celebrated as a sign of authenticity. The deepest legacy, however, did not lie in visible changes. It lived in the way everyone began to see differently. Parents who had once demanded detailed reports now asked for stories about what their children had created. Educators who once followed the curriculum like a script now reserved time for moments of spontaneous magic. Even former inspectors began visiting, no longer to audit, but to observe and learn. Leo, who had lost everything, gained something no paycheck could match. The certainty that his way of seeing the world was not a defect, but a gift. He started giving workshops to other daycare centers, teaching not surveillance, but poetic observation. His nights were no longer spent in monitoring rooms, but at home, photographing his newborn daughter with the eyes of someone who knows that every ordinary moment is extraordinary if you look long enough. The truest victory came when Eleanor published her study on what she called the beauty effect. Concrete data showing that children exposed to unstructured creative elements showed not only better emotional development, but also stronger cognitive growth. What had begun as poetic intuition had become proven science. Beauty was not a luxury. It was a fundamental need. The most transformative moment of all happened on an ordinary afternoon, when Leo visited the daycare and saw something no camera could fully contain. Anna teaching children to create their own constellations. Marcus helping them prepare edible forests. Sarah dancing with them to music that was nowhere in the curriculum. And the mothers watching, not with worry, but with wonder. In the middle of it all, Leo saw his own daughter, now a few months old, watching the world with eyes that still knew how to see magic in everything. He understood then that the real transformation did not lie in fixing the system, but in remembering why the system existed in the first place. To protect and nurture the beauty already there, not to control it or erase it. In the final scene, Leo is at home with his family, holding his sleeping daughter in his arms. The bills still need to be paid, the future is still uncertain, but something fundamental has changed. He looks out the window at the stars he once loved to photograph, the same stars Anna writes about and that now shine over a transformed daycare, and feels not the relief of having one, but the gratitude of someone who has learned to see. He finally understands that the greatest miracle was never the toy constellations or the vegetable forests. It was the human capacity to turn surveillance into witness, care into ceremony, and the ordinary into extraordinary. It was the realization that the most important cameras are not on the walls, but in how we choose to focus our eyes and our hearts on the world around us. When we finally learn to see the beauty that already exists, we discover that it was always there, waiting patiently for us in the small things, in the simple gestures, in the common moments that hold up the world while we rush after what we think matters more, without noticing that the real treasure was in front of our eyes the entire time.